Hey, what's up, everybody? Today I'm going to review the epic sci-fi novel A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge. And man, where to start with this one? Vernor Vinge is a five-time Hugo-winning author and retired math professor. This story is the 1993 Hugo Award-winning sci-fi space epic involving some of the most interesting, well-fleshed-out aliens you'll ever read about. We get descriptions of over a half a dozen different alien species, but of central prominence in this story are the Tines, a race of pack dogs that function as teams of 3 to 6 individuals comprising a whole. These packs share a mind. The way the author spends time building on our understanding of these aliens is one of the things that kept this book so interesting. The worlds are really interesting too, but it's the characters and the story that really make this book special. Another race that we learn a lot about are the Scrode Riders. These are an ancient race of, now bear with me on this, sentient, intelligent plants with poor short-term memory that love to play in the surf, and they get around on these high-tech wheeled carts called Scrodes. If you read this book, I guarantee you, you're going to want to go out and buy a plant and mount it on its very own Scrode. So, A Fire Upon the Deep is the first production in the Zones of Thought series by Vernor Vinge. The Zones of Thought is a concept for these novels, and it works something like this. The Milky Way galaxy can be divided into several concentric rings, and within the boundaries of each of these different rings, things work differently. In toward the core, you have the unthinking depths, where there is no technology or high intelligence. The next ring out is the slow zone. After the slow zone is the beyond, where we find advanced civilizations with sophisticated technologies like faster-than-light travel and cold sleep. This is where our story takes place on the Tines world, though it's right near the boundary to the slow zone, so it's very different from the central beyond, and even more different from the high beyond even further out. Finally, out past the beyond is the transcend, which is where the powers reside. These dividing lines are not static, they can actually flux, though the nature of this function is not really explored in detail, so it remains a bit of a mystery. Technologies and intelligences from each of these zones slows down and stops working if they travel into a deeper zone, or if the zone boundary travels out past them. This zones of thought idea is really the skeleton of the beast that is A Fire Upon the Deep. Even if it doesn't make a lot of sense, it provides for some really cool storytelling. And let's remember, this is science fiction. So this story is big. At over 600 pages, this book has a little bit of everything. Love and war, alliances and deceptions, talking plants. After accidentally releasing the Blight, an evil superpower, advanced superpower from the Transcend, a ship of humans crash lands on the primitive Tines world in the deep beyond, right at the border of the slow zone. These humans are also believed to have a countermeasure that can stop the Blight. Beneath all of this, though, the inhabitants of the Tines world is fractured into two warring states that both witness this spaceship crash, and both parties end up with a human in their company, and they're both trying to use the humans' advanced technology to further their cause for their political faction so that they won't be wiped out. The reader will be led to hate one side and root for the other. We see all kinds of betrayals and war strategizing, but also the story is about the lone humans being surrounded by an alien race. Each of our humans thinks that they're the sole survivor of the crash. One group of Tines massacres all the humans and blames the other side. 75% of the story is about these humans among the Tines. In fact, the story was originally going to be called Among the Tines, but they changed it to A Fire Upon the Deep. There were a lot of things I really liked about this book. Mostly, it's the descriptions and interactions with the Tines that are the most interesting parts. As an example of how these tines work, one of the leaders, Woodcarver, says that she selectively bred certain breeds to use in her own assemblage so that she could optimize herself. How cool is that? And something that struck me is that these tines operate similar to how the zones themselves work. When the members of a pack are away from each other, the unit breaks down. Thinking and abilities are severely hindered, just like traveling toward the galactic core. I'm sure this was probably coincidental, but I thought it was a pretty cool parallel. So it's not just all of his ideas about these aliens that is so cool, but the way he gives you new information over the course of the book about the way these things function. Some of the ideas in here are so cool, like civilizations moving from one zone of thought to another, kind of like the sci-fi equivalent of social mobility, and the author's ideas about the interactions of civilizations in different zones. This book had so many fascinating ideas and concepts in it, it seriously made me want to stop reading and start developing my own sci-fi stories. That's good storytelling when that happens. It makes it take a long time to get through the book, though. And a common criticism with sci-fi is that it lacks the care in the development of characters. But as great as the plot was in this book, this is very much centered on the characters, and quite a few of them, almost all, are very well developed throughout. Now, this book was not perfect. It was really good, but there were some things that I thought would have been better if they were different. It didn't need to be over 600 pages, so it was a little long, I felt. But something I didn't like is there were really no moments when the writing and the ideas makes you stop and say, whoa. The whole thing was pretty good, and there were plenty of fascinating ideas, but nothing in it blew me away. See, I kind of feel like I'm wrecked for sci-fi, because ever since I read The Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy, The Three-Body Problem, The Dark Forest, and Death's End, it takes a lot to blow me away now because of the stuff in those books, especially Death's End. The ideas were so much of what I was looking for that now just everything seems so pedestrian next to the ideas in those books. And the reason I read Fire Upon the Deep in the first place was because I saw it appear as the #1 or very high on several people's list for best sci-fi. I thought it was nothing compared to The Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy. No moments in A Fire Upon the Deep made me stop and reflect on how good the writing was. It felt like anyone could have written the story. Not just anyone could have developed the characters and the zones of thought. I do want to make sure to give a lot of credit for these ideas because they're awesome. Then we have two resolution conflicts, the Tines War and the Blight. The Tines War just wasn't that interesting, but the resolution for the Blight I thought was a really cool idea. It was just the rest of the story seemed so average. Overall, the product was definitely above average, but I was expecting a bit more after how highly people rated it. To be honest, it kind of worries me that I might have more trouble than I thought finding something I love as much as, say, Death's End, because I actually haven't read that many sci-fi novels. I mainly read nonfiction, and that being said, I would rate A Fire Upon the Deep in the top 10 sci-fi novels. The absolute biggest problem for me with this novel was just the author's writing style. Everything was just so cryptic, forcing the reader to make guesses about what we think he meant. He would never just simply state something. He always had to overcomplicate it and say it like artfully, I guess. I hate that. I felt like that really damaged the storytelling. There were so many parts of this novel that could have been so much more interesting if they were written differently. For example, the idea for the ending was really cool, but the author's wording muddied up the reader's view of what happened. So many parts I just feel like I think I know what he means, but I really can't be sure, and sometimes I just have no idea. As an example, if he wanted to say, then Bill shot the alien, he would not say, then Bill shot the alien. He would say something like, His ears rang with his decision, and there was blood beneath his feet, as well as more on his hands. Like, even that is way too clear. That is too much of a literal description of the events. I can't even come up with a good example of how he does this. He can write something without writing it at all. It's really quite impressive. You just have to intuit what you think he meant. Mercifully, there are times when I guess he gets tired of doing this or something, and then he starts writing normally again. But he always does it for the events that are important to the story. It was driving me crazy. I'm sure some people will like this and maybe think that it's deep and artful, and maybe it is, but hey, I don't need that to enjoy the story. Just tell me what happens and let the merit of the ideas carry themselves. But again, this is a matter of style, and Vernor just operates on a deeper level than I do, and to hold that against him is probably a bit unfair. Then, this is a review, and I need to tell you what I thought. There's a couple more things I want to talk about that really bugged me. Sometimes when you read sci-fi, you have to suspend disbelief and just decide you're not going to ask certain questions. It is fiction after all, right? Well, this book appearing very high on a number of people's lists, and I feel that the best fiction works will work through issues like this. So, for the examples I want to give, we need to discuss the ending of the book. So, we are officially entering major spoiler territory. If you don't want the ending of this book spoiled, stop watching this video. Okay then, so I thought the ending of this book was such a cool idea. The whole story revolves around the Blight and this countermeasure to the Blight, which is capable of destroying it. In the end, our hero activates the countermeasure, which causes the boundary of the slow zone to explode outward, enveloping the Blight and rendering it impotent, or the book says, like an insect in amber, and in the process, destroying countless innocent bystanding civilizations that were in the wrong place. It's so cool. You have a major sacrifice with major stakes. It was a great ending, but the more I thought about it, something just didn't seem right. It had been established that the Blight knew about this countermeasure. It knew what it was and how it worked. And the Blight was supposed to be this super intelligence. So do you see the major problem here? It worked by expanding the boundaries to the slow zone. So all the Blight had to do was not pursue the hero into the depths of the slow zone, and no threat could possibly have even been posed to the Blight. It is the Blight's act of going into the slow zone that rendered it vulnerable and ultimately destroyed it. Why didn't it just stay out in the transcend where it had all of its power? Yeah, the further out the Blight is in the zones of thought, the more power it had. This is a plot hole that completely undoes the entire plot. Another thing, the human ship that landed on the Tynes world had a bunch of frozen humans in suspended animation. We, as the reader, worry about them throughout the entire novel, and in the end, they simply just aren't mentioned anymore. What? I thought that was pretty important. Maybe I missed something? The writing was pretty cryptic in a lot of places, especially in places significant to the development of the story. I think if the writer thought about these issues, he could have worked through them, but things happened the way they did, and people loved the book, including me. I really did like it. I probably will not read any of the other books in the Zones of Thought series. The balance of good versus not so good was just a little bit too off, especially when the prequel is over 700 pages. That's a big investment. It took me almost a week to read this book, and it was also slow going because of the passages I had to reread and proceed somewhat confused because of his writing style. I feel like I've been pretty hard on Vernor Vinge. I really liked his work, but it was just that, his work, not mine. I'm doing this for leisure. I don't want to have to work for my enjoyment. So, after all that, yeah, I would definitely still recommend this book because the zones of thought and the way he develops his characters make this an experience worth sharing. I'm really glad that I read this book, and for the most part, I did really enjoy it. Well, I think that's going to do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. I do hope you like this video. And hey, if you enjoy a really cool, well-developed, long story involving what could be the most interesting aliens you've ever read about, go pick up A Fire Upon the Deep by Vernor Vinge.